So what we're going to talk about today is going to be a streetcar named Desire, and we're going to look at this text um, in from the perspective of its central theme, which is essentially the idea of deception. Okay, so the idea of deception is the sort of central theme or central concern idea which runs through the entire play. And what we're going to do, okay, is we're going to focus on this from the perspective, first of all, or mainly, I should say, of the main character in the text, which is Blanche. And we're going to analyze Blanche in terms of the deception that she creates, okay, in order to try and get her way, and also the sort of deception that she has in terms of her self-deception, and ultimately what this leads to in terms of her sort of losing her ability to understand and be in touch with reality itself. Okay, lying so much that she doesn't know what is real at the end. Okay, so the the story begins. Okay, or the story overall, I should say, is essentially Blanche Dubois. Okay, Blanche, this is the character here. Comes to visit her sister and live with her for a while. And in the beginning of this sort of in the play that we're led to believe that Blanche is sort of like a very polite, innocent, wealthy, and proper woman who was sort of like a school teacher, and she's come on hard times, and some unfortunate things have happened to her, none of which are her fault, and she, in a way, is sort of like a victim of her circumstances of reality, and she's sort of just coming to live with her sister for a little while, and then she's going to get back on her feet. So from the beginning, she sort of portrays herself to be this victim who needs to be looked after, who needs to be protected, and who needs to be saved, rescued from her, from and protected from like the bad things of the world. Okay. Um, but this essentially is Blanche's deception. Okay, this is the sort of starting point of her deception, or it's part of the main deception that she um, pulls off in the text or in the play. And we see that from the very beginning in that the stage directions describe her, and this is a good thing to focus on if you're gonna write an essay about this, for example. The stage directions right from the outset focus on how she has an uncertain manner. Another way of saying basically she's nervous or she's not sure about something. She's not. To be uncertain is the opposite of being sure, being certain, being definite. So she's sort of acting in a way as soon as she walks on stage, which is like she's nervous, she's hiding something, she's afraid of something being revealed. Okay, which goes to, again, to the heart of the idea that she is putting on a character. Okay, she's putting on um she's lying about something. She's putting on an image which isn't real. So she's afraid that people might discover that secret, okay, the truth about her, which we'll get into soon. And if that secret is to come out, then essentially the image she's created of being this innocent, naive, well-to-do, proper woman will be shattered, and then people will look at her differently in a way that she doesn't want them to look at her. Now, also in terms of this idea of something being uncertain or being not sure is, if you think about the idea of certainty or being sure of something, it means it's a thing that you can draw lines around and define. It's something which is definable, okay? Something which you can categorize and organize, something definite. It's this thing and not that thing. It's something that has borders. Okay, this is something that which is certainty. Certainty is borders, okay, which is, I don't want to get too distracted here, but one of the reasons why people feel anxious, for example, in one of the ways that people feel very calm is when they have rules or instructions which are clear, defined, that they can follow in order for them to get or like know how to behave in a certain situation. For example, with children, children become anxious when they don't have clear rules to follow, something that you might not understand, you might not have thought about before, but it's true. And because what the rules do is basically they define the situation, and they say, this is what this place is, this is how you behave, do this, and you get rewarded. Don't do it, and there's a consequence, a negative consequence. And that creates a sense of safety because you know where you are and you know what it is that you're talking or you know what it is that you're supposed to do. So same thing with Blanche in that she doesn't act this way, she does the opposite. Okay, which is that she doesn't have a very clear uh she is not defined in terms of excuse me, clear lines. She's not defined in terms of clear lines and a clear description. Okay, as in this is what she is and she's not that thing. She blurs the lines of who she is and what she looks like on purpose. Okay, she does that because it helps her to not be defined. It helps her to avoid people knowing what she actually is, who she actually is. And now tying the ideas together, you can say this is partly why at the end she sort of has a mental breakdown. Okay, you can say maybe she becomes overwhelmed with anxiety because she doesn't know who she is, right? She blurs the lines so much for everyone that she actually blurs them for herself, and that's why at the end of the text she has like a mental breakdown and she doesn't know who she is, where she is, how to walk. She loses everything because the lines become so blurry that she has no definite grasp of anything. Okay, now just the final thing on this blurring of lines or being uncertain. Um, you can see this in the way that she constantly bathes. Okay, she's constantly having taking baths and constantly using makeup. And even when she takes a bath, she makes sure that the light is softened. So again, all of these things go against creating defined edges, defined lines, defined boxes. The makeup softens her face, it takes away the lines. The bath again takes away, the water, it takes away any kind of clear way of seeing her. And again, the point of it is to try and take away, I guess, as well through the bath. And we'll talk about this when we get to that part of the text. With the bathing, it's supposed to take away her past and so on, blur who she actually is, um, and not let people discover that real identity. Okay. Now one thing here with this metaphor suggests a moth. One of my students very intelligently um came up with the analysis that this idea of suggesting a moth basically is that moths have to avoid light even though they're attracted to the light. Okay, they are drawn to the light because if they go towards light, like a fire or like a light bulb, which is hot, they die. They die. And so Blanche is like this. It's like this moth, right? Which is that she has to avoid the truth, the light. And we can add to this, just like the moth, even though she avoids it to some extent, you could say that maybe she's attracted to it, to reality. In other words, she wishes to some extent that she could be um real, she could be a real version of what she portrays to be, which is why she tries so hard to make this fake thing real. She's like the moth which dances around the light being the truth. It dances around the light knowing that it can't ever capture it or touch it because it'll die, but it wants to be as close to the light as possible, just like Blanche wants to be as close to this image which she portrays as possible, knowing that she can't actually get there because of the things that she's done. Or another way to put it, in order to get there, she would have to give up. She'd have to go into the light like the moth, and her present self would have to die, basically, and she'd have to give up the image in order to embrace the light. Okay, good. Hmm. Excuse me. Okay, now the next thing, again, this sort of touches on what we've just said. Um, which is that when Blanche arrives in New Orleans, when she arrives at the place where her sister lives, the first sort of thing she says when she meets her sister is she tells her sister not to look at her until she's had a bath, and this would also probably include until she's put her makeup on. And again, this just goes to the idea that she is desperate to avoid being seen in any kind of light which isn't optimal. In other words, she wants to be seen at her best at all times. She doesn't want to be seen in any kind of, you could say, real way at all, not even by her own sister. Excuse me. And what this tells you basically is that um that the deception she is putting on, because remember all this is about deception. The deception she is creating is, in some sense, is so fragile that she even has to deceive her own sister in order to keep it going. So the deception she's putting on is not strong. It's not strong. It's extremely weak, extremely fragile. And to some extent, this is a good sort of it's a good lesson, I guess, philosophically, in that deception, generally speaking, is often extremely fragile. The entire mafia organization, um, when the mafia got created, the gangster families in America in New York, when it got created, one of the fundamental things you would have to do in order for you to become a member of the mafia is you would have to take an oath of omerta, which means that you would stay silent. You wouldn't share the secrets of the other members. You wouldn't say what's going on. You would take this oath of silence. And the reason for this is because what happened when the mafia was taken down was essentially people began to tell on other members of the organization, and that's how the whole thing, 100-year-old plus organization of crime, one of the most powerful organizations of crime in history, was essentially destroyed from very simple, people telling, and even simpler than that, just by very simple wiretaps from the police recording conversations between people, which shows you that the entire deception, that the cover, so deception is like a cover and it's a lie. All the lies which were covering the 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 actions of the criminal families, all of them were essentially destroyed very easily by some simple phone recordings and people telling. Very simple thing destroyed the whole thing. So anyway, it's a good philosophical reflection, which is that deception, generally speaking, is extremely easy to uh, fall apart. Which is why the people who lie often find themselves layering their lies one on top of the other, because they have to do that in order to keep the lie alive and to avoid it being destroyed, because their very lies are normally very fragile, and the truth is extremely durable. Truth is unbreakable, essentially. That's the idea. Lies are fragile, like glass, and truth is unbreakable, like a diamond or something. Okay. Anyway, so we have her now filling up a bath, and one of the things she says in the sort of middle of the text or middle of the play is that she says, "I'm very adaptable to circumstances," and she says this when in conversation with Mitch. Okay, if I'm not wrong, she says this in conversation with Mitch, and excuse me, when she's saying this, okay, when she's saying this, what she's saying essentially is that she understands how to change herself in order to survive or thrive in the situation that she's in, to deal with the problems that she has, and to sort of change herself to fit and do well in the situation that she's in. What she's basically revealing in like a small way, not totally, but in a small way, is she's revealing how in the past, this is the true reality of Blanche, which is that she is not an innocent school teacher who's just like a well-to-do, proper naive woman. But in the past, basically what happened is she lost her job, and thereafter she supported herself via prostitution, essentially. And she would see clients, people would pay her, obviously, um, in different hotels, and this is essentially one of the things that leads to her secrets, these secrets coming out because from Stanley, okay, from hearing about these things from someone that he knows. So basically, the reality of Blanche is that she's a woman who has lived a life which is not um, like innocent or naive, but she's lived a life of, you could say, difficulty, hardship, and she's had to do things which at the time would have been seen as extremely taboo. Even I guess to today, they're still seen as like negative and they're still seen as taboo and wrong. Back then, even more so. And At this point, someone could ask the question, is Blanche a hero or a villain? Is Blanche a good character or and not a good character? Ethical or not ethical? And the question really would be, if we say that she had to do these things to support herself, the question obviously would be, number one, did she have to do them? Which we don't know because we're not given that much of a, detailed backstory. But so if we believe her and say that, okay, yes, she had to do them, that would be one question in itself. And then number two would be, how does she behave? Okay. Knowing that she's done these things, how does she act thereafter? So say she had to do these things to support herself, um, which is okay. You can judge that as good or not good, or bad or not bad. But then in the rest of the play, how does she act? How does she behave? Well, what we can see is it seems that Blanche, from her times surviving and struggling on the streets, essentially, um, because essentially prostitution is like a street hustle. You can think about a street career, a street profession. You can say that, when it comes to, say, crime or making money illegally or making money in the black market, if you want to call it, in the alternative economy, if you want to call it that, we could say that there's certain different professions or careers that a person can undertake, and like prostitution is like one of these. It's a career which is essentially, um, it's one of these things fuels the underground economy essentially. Um, okay, so anyway, so she's had to go through these difficult times. Okay, she's had to live this kind of life, and one of the things that comes with dealing with, say, crime or like the underground economy, the alternative economy, uh, the other careers would be things like robbing people, stealing, uh, uh, killing people for money, um, those type of things. It's like the underground economy, basically, extortion, selling drugs, that kind of thing. One of the things that comes along with this sort of life is essentially learning how to be deceptive, learning how to be deceptive. And in the very words that she uses here, the idea of being adaptable, which itself ties in directly to the idea of survival and surviving, the street essentially is a place where people have to act in a way which is best for survival. So it's not best for morality or being a good person, it's best for survival. And prostitution, like I said, is one of these professions which essentially would have taught her to how to survive, and part of that survival is essentially deception, learning how to lie to people in order to preserve yourself. Okay? Excuse me. So, for example, I don't want to get too graphic or anything, but for example, like her part of her job would be to convince these men that she actually likes them and likes them enough to obviously sleep with them, so that they pay her and that they feel good about that, and they want to pay her again and again. That's the idea. So that's just like one type of lie. Obviously, she would have to lie to them about her name, where she's from, and all that stuff in order to protect her identity, um, and so on. So essentially, what happened is Blanche entered this world, this underground economy, the street economy, and because of that, she learned to become a good. She essentially learned to become a good liar. Okay, she learned to become a good liar, and the issue with this is she didn't stop lying once she got to her sister's house. That's the problem. So if we're asking, is Blanche a good person or not a good person? If, for example, Blanche had done these things to survive, fine. Maybe she had no other option, fine. But then the problem is the lying doesn't stop once she gets to her sister's house. It just continues, and we can see from the first way that what she says to her sister at the beginning, it continues to the point that she even lies to her own sister. She tries to deceive her sister. She lies to her sister. She lies to Mitch. Tries to lie to Stanley, and so on. She lies to everyone, and this eventually turns inward, and she lies to herself. It makes sense. which obviously makes us then have to take a more negative view of her in that she doesn't just stop and leave what was in the past behind her, but she takes on these characteristics forward into her what could have been a better life. And she does it for selfish reasons. This is another thing about the street economy or underground economy, making money illegally, is that you don't have to, but essentially the rule is that you act selfishly and that you assume everyone else is also acting selfishly. That's the idea. Okay? There's no trust, there's no friendship really, there's no love in that game. That's the idea. Especially with prostitution, the idea is that you trick someone else, which is why customers of prostitutes are called tricks. You trick them to pay you, and you trick them into thinking that you care about them. And ideally, uh, the best sort of prostitutes, pimps, these type of people are the ones that can trick the person so much that they fall in love with them, and that therefore they sort of continue to pay them and pay them and pay them, give them everything that they can, um, almost like a parasitical relationship, like a parasite. Um, and then like you move on to the next person, not caring about what happens to this individual that has ruined themselves to pay you. And it's a very it's a very dark thing. I don't want to get into it too much, but it's very dark, and you can see the sort of parasiting idea continues on, not just from the prostitute, but also from the pimp who is above her, who she pays. And it's this idea is so deep that if you read some of these, you know, writings by different pimps, one of the first things that they say is they lay out this kind of philosophy, and I'm telling you this because this is how Blanche thinks essentially. And the philosophy goes something like everyone in the world is in competition with each other. And a modern example of this would be Andrew Tate. Yeah, this would be a good example. Or we could say at least we could say for sure, maybe what he used to be like. I don't know. I've got a strong suspicion he hasn't changed that much. But in any case, what he used to be like in his own videos, if you watch his own content from his early days, he expresses the same philosophy that I'm about to tell you, which is that everyone is essentially in competition with everyone else, and that you have to essentially look out for yourself and you have to win by any means. Okay, the idea is extremely person versus person, and it's extremely selfish, extremely selfish. Um, and this is the heart, okay, of why Blanche acts in the way that she does, okay, which is that she puts herself first and she deceives other people uh, in order to get what she wants. Well, she tries to do it anyway. That's the idea. Just like the pimp deceives and parasites, meaning he captures and manipulates, takes advantage of the prostitute. He tells her that she is nothing without him. Again, look at the early Andrew Tate stuff, and you'll see what I'm saying. Or if you read the writings of any pimp, I don't recommend you do it because it's extremely dark. But I've done it to some extent. What they do is they break the woman down, or they break the woman down essentially, and tell her that she isn't anything without them. And then essentially the prostitute, she takes part in this dark sort of dark manipulation, in that she then manipulates the men that she talks to, um, and she tricks them and deceives them into thinking that she loves them, excuse me, so that they give her everything. They give her everything, and when she drains them of their resources, then she moves on to like other people like that, yeah. And together they both, so the pimp exploiting the prostitute, prostitute exploiting the customer, trick the person who pays her, and they just continue on like this. Yeah, it's extremely destructive, and it's like bad all around you. That's the idea. Anyway, so Blanche comes from this kind of environment and this kind of setup and situation, and then she leaves it, goes to her sister's house, and she doesn't stop. Okay, she essentially tries to uh, If you look at what she does as soon as she enters the house, she drinks their alcohol without asking anyone if she can. So again, she's already extracting resources. She um she wears these fancy clothes and stuff. She tries to impress people so that they will treat her with sort of, what can I do for you? What can I do for you? She almost gets Mitch to marry her, to look after her, to take because he believes that she's an innocent victim. He falls for her deception. Um and So you can see, okay, the idea is that she's still behaving in the same manipulative, deceptive type of way. She doesn't change, which would lead us to think that you could take a negative view on her and say that she's not such a great character, which is why at the end of the text, she sort of has her, I guess you could call it, not, I guess, karma to some extent, but not necessarily karma, because it's a little bit complicated. Because what happens to her is essentially Stanley attacks her and sexually assaults her is one reading of it. Another reading of it is that she actually has fallen for Stanley and that she likes him and they both cheat with each other behind Stella's back. But if we take the first reading that essentially he assaults her, he rapes her essentially, um, this essentially is the last thing which causes her breakdown. Okay, so she tries to trick Stanley, but he doesn't fall for it because he also is a sort of negative, dark individual. And so he's like he understands the lies and he sees through them because he himself is a liar also. And so it comes to the point where he eventually attacks her and assaults her and then she has a breakdown, okay, because of this. And at the end of the text, the result of all of her deception, all of her lying, all of her manipulation, if you like, of reality, is that she can no longer, the word here is blind, she's not actually blind, but she can no longer see reality. She can no longer tell what is real and what is not real. She has lost touch of reality. Everything now, to go back to the first slide and the first thing we talked about, everything now is uncertain to her. Everything is blurred to her, like someone that's blind. Huh? Everything to her is a blur. She can't see anything clearly at all. She has to be led by the hand in order to in order to be able to walk, to leave. So you can say this is the end result of all of the deception, all the lying. It's sort of, a person that lies. When you lie, what you do is you sort of distort your reality, um, a little bit, okay, just a little bit. When you lie many times, the lies stack up in a way that you build a story, so you create a character of yourself and you create a sort of fiction world, a world that's not real, and you begin to live inside of your story as opposed to living inside of like reality. And if you continue to do this, you continue and continue to do this and dive into it more and more and more, you eventually get to the point where you don't know what is reality anymore. All you have is your story. And when your story gets shattered, like what happens to her when she gets traumatized by Stanley, reality hits her, dark reality, which is being attacked in this kind of way. She has this image or fiction world that she's the queen and no one would harm her, no one will touch her. She's an innocent, gentle lady that everyone's going to protect and treat nicely. And then reality, a very dark reality, shatters all of her story world. Then you end up traumatized and you end up in a state of shock where you don't know what is what and you have no grasp of reality. You have a breakdown, basically. So that's what happens to her. Okay, that's what happens to her. Excuse me. Okay. Now, just two more things. Okay, let's talk about Stanley quickly, and then we'll talk about Stella, and then we'll be done. Okay, so now the character of Stanley is also involved in deception in that in two different ways. One is that he recognizes that Blanche is lying right from the outset, and he recognizes this because he himself is an adept liar, an adept manipulator. He is an adept abuser, and therefore, just like someone that's a thief can see other people that are thieves, they can see someone who's stealing something. They understand how it works. Um, an adept liar, manipulator, abuser can also see someone else who is good at these things or who is doing these things, and he can spot them. So that's why he's not tricked by Blanche at all. Even when they first meet, he sees all of her deception out, and he is the one who eventually causes it to come crashing down. So there is number one. Now, number two, in terms of his own deception, um, Stanley's deception is of Stella primarily, his wife. In that, basically, Stanley has manipulated Stella to the point where he beats her and he essentially abuses her with how he talks to her and how he is aggressive towards her and how he acts, breaks things, etc. But he has manipulated her to believing that he is fully in love with her and that he is her loving, caring husband who sometimes explodes, and it's not really his fault. Okay. So he essentially also has an image which he has created, which he deceives her with, and hides the reality of who he actually is behind. Okay. So the reality of Stanley is that he's an abusive, drunk husband who is aggressive and breaks things. He's violent and he cheats on his wife. That's his reality. The image he creates is that he's a loving, intensely loving, caring, um, careful, to some extent, gentle, attention-giving, loyal, monogamous husband who Stella should be grateful for having and who will always be there for her completely. That's the image that he creates, which is in her mind. Um, Now I don't want to get into too much detail into how he does this, but um, it's essentially, we don't really have too many, what do you call it? Too much detail of this in the text, but I guess just by way of advice, it's kind of useful. He does this essentially, or he would have done this. This is not in the text, so if you're writing an essay, you don't need to mention this, unless it's like a psychological essay, then maybe. If you're writing an essay on the text itself, this is not in the text. What I'm about to tell you is not in the text, but it's essentially how this works. Okay. So the way that this works essentially is, uh, when it comes to abuse and manipulation and this kind of situation where you can slap your wife and she believes that you love her, or I should say, a man can slap you and you believe that you love him. It also works the opposite, but let's just say with the violent, because we're talking about Stanley, who's a man. So we'll talk about this. The way it works essentially is that the person, okay, I'll generalize it because it does happen. It happens both ways. Yeah, women can manipulate men this way. Men manipulate women this way. With women, it's not often violent. It's just mostly emotional manipulation. But anyway, it's the same process. So what happens is, with the abusive person, the abuse always begins extremely slowly and in a small way. So with Stanley and Stella, what would have happened is he would have started the abuse by saying something small to her, which she may have been uncomfortable with, but she didn't notice as being anything real or damaging, serious. And then essentially over time, the abuser just pushes the boundary of this abuse until it eventually turns into physical hitting, which actually happens both ways too. Your physical hitting, slapping, and then eventually all the way to beating, which can transform eventually into, unfortunately, many times actually killing. Um, if it goes on unchecked. Um, so the key is essentially if you find yourself in a situation where a person um does something which makes you uncomfortable or you think is mean unnecessarily, just take note of it. And then if you notice that they do something else which is a little bit worse, and you find yourself starting to go on a little step ladder like this, then just know that you might be in a sort of abusive situation and it might be time to exit. Another thing very common which happens with this is the real red flag if you want to know what the red flag is. The real red flag is the abuser is able to do these things because they slowly destroy your self-esteem, your image of yourself. And they do this in the same way, sort of first by hitting you with a little small comment, which makes you sort of critical about yourself. And then they just stack the comments up and up and up they might start with, why did you cook the food this way? Or why are you, if it's the other way, why are you wearing that shirt? It doesn't look good. Like that, something small. And then eventually it turns into, you're ugly. I hate you. Maybe a woman might say to a man, you're a coward, you're weak, no one respects you. I hate you, leave me alone, blah blah, like that. So if you notice these two sort of things happening, I would just say, to be honest, if someone makes you lose self-esteem, it's just dip, yeah. It's always a bad thing, yeah. Even if they're just not abusive, but they're just, you don't want to be around that energy anyway, yeah. But anyway, if both are happening, then it's time to escape. And I've put in all of my videos now, I include links in the description, to resources if you're in an abusive situation. So if you are unfortunately in that situation, have a look and get some help. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, finally we come to Stella. This will be the last thing we talk about. We come to Stella, who is also involved in two or three different forms of deception. Okay, so first, obviously, just uh, carrying on from what we just mentioned a minute ago with Stanley. So Stella is obviously the wife of Stanley. The primary deception Stella engages in, besides with her sister Blanche, is her self-deception about Stanley. Okay, which is that he beats her and she deceives herself into thinking that this isn't wrong. But he loves her and that she should. This is part of her normal relationship. Essentially, she lies to herself that this is okay, it's normal, and that she therefore shouldn't leave because of it. Okay. And then there's another sort of, and obviously with Blanche, she goes along with Blanche's lies and she follows what Blanche tells her to do. She obeys her when she says, go do this, go do that. She turns a blind eye to some extent to Blanche's flirting with Stanley. She doesn't recognize it. Or if she sees it, she chooses to ignore it. And so to some extent, she on purpose deceives herself about the relationship between Stanley and Blanche, or the flirting, I should say, between Stanley and Blanche. She ignores her sister's um, lying and deception, doesn't question it, doesn't poke holes in her sister's story. Okay, but there's another subtle deception. So all those are kind of, you can work out and they're kind of obvious. Now there's another subtle deception, or there's another subtle thing that happens, okay, um which is sort of more complex, but I think it's worth noting before we finish. Excuse me. Which is that Stella deceives herself, okay, in a sort of uh complicated and interesting way. Okay. So when Stella describes why she likes Stanley, okay, she describes essentially that he is extremely masculine and that he has extremely masculine qualities. Like, for example, he's like dominant, strong. He is physically, like I said, dominant, physically strong, physically um, able. He can fight, etc., etc., etc. He's leading. He's confident. He's loud. He's charismatic. All of these sort of qualities, which she's attracted to, um, and which I could say women in general probably are also attracted to. So she describes Stanley as having all of these. Okay. Now, the reality is, okay, that what she describes, okay, and what Stanley actually is, um, are not exactly the same, are not exactly the same thing. Okay. So what Stanley actually is, okay, is and maybe the best way I can describe this is if I tell you like what he is, and what she thinks he is, or what she tricks herself into believing he is. So Stanley is loud and aggressive. Stella tricks herself into thinking loud and aggressive is the same as confident and assertive or dominant, charismatic. Okay? Stanley is violent and, like I said, aggressive, violent. She tricks herself or deceives herself, even when he smacks her, deceives herself into thinking that this is dominant or brave, courageous, able to protect and willing to defend her from other people, and that he is charming or able to charming would be a good word. He could say the right things that would make women like him. He's charming. That's what she thinks in her mind. The reality is he is manipulative. Manipulative, not charming, manipulative. He's able to control people by lying to them or tricking them, taking advantage of them. So essentially, 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 Stella has been tricked. Okay, she's been tricked into thinking that Stanley is a sort of hero figure. I could sum it up as being like a hero figure, that he is essentially protective, dominant, strong, willing and able to protect her, charming, confident, like James Bond. What he is actually is he is manipulative, abusive, violent, aggressive. Not only does he not defend her or protect, he beats her. He's the one who is her attacker, and she is the victim of him. And this deception is extremely deep. Okay, it's extremely complex, and there's different reasons why she might have fallen into it. If we just think about the time we're talking about and the situation, it's very likely that Stanley was probably her first boyfriend or her first serious relationship, and they're both, obviously quite young in the text. I can assume, I'm assuming. So she's not had much experience with men, and so these the qualities, the tricky thing is that the qualities appear to be similar. It's just that the effects of the qualities are vastly different. Okay, so it's kind of a deeper point, but it's something to think about and something to keep in mind. Um, if some of you might be thinking, well, how do I know the difference, right? I don't want to be tricked. Some of you guys might be thinking like, how do you know the difference, right? How do you tell who's who? Yeah, how do you tell who's the hero and who's the devil in disguise? I would say that I would say fundamentally, what is ethics or what is evil? What is good? Fundamentally, all these things revolve around the idea of harm or hurting someone, like actual harm. So I'd say fundamentally, if the person's behavior hurts you in some way, and I don't mean just like hurts your it actually would be hurting your feelings, but I don't mean just they do something that you dislike because you differ in opinion. Yeah, they wear a blue shirt, you want them to wear a green one. I mean, it actually hurts you, causes you psychological damage or physical damage, some way emotional damage. Then you're probably more likely dealing with the devil and not dealing with a hero, because fundamental to all good people, especially all good men, I would say, all heroes, is that the hero goes out of his way to make sure that his own darkness does not damage you. He recognizes he has darkness inside of him and that he is dangerous. He recognizes it. He is he is able to harm others if he chooses. He is able to manipulate other people because he's good with words and he's intelligent if he wants to. But he goes out of his way, or she goes out of her way, to make sure that they don't do that. Okay. And if they do that, they apologize and they feel very bad about it. Okay, because the hero is the one that carries the ethical burden. They feel the weight of being a good person. They feel it more than the average person does. So that would be the way that you could tell, essentially, on a very simple level. You know, do they harm other people? or are they a net but benefit, positive, like actual benefit, not just that they talk about being a good person, but are they actually a good person? You know, do they help people? Do they protect people in a real way without harming them? That's how you know if you know what you're dealing with, basically. And of course, no one's perfect, but the key is the good person will apologize for their mistakes and change to not just apologize. Whereas the bad person will either not apologize at all or just apologize and not change. That's another way that you can know. Okay, anyway, so there's the text, giving you some philosophy and psychology also. If you have any questions, just drop them below. Just take care of yourselves and see you soon.